He stood at the absolute peak of Hollywood. Oscar on the shelf. Checks with 7 zeros. A name that meant something. Not just famous, but mythic, the kind of famous that makes studios nervous and audiences lean forward. He could have coasted. He could have chosen the careful, comfortable path that most actors take when they reach that altitude. The safe franchise, the dignified award season picture, the graceful management of a legend. He chose something else entirely. And what followed was one of the most bewildering, painful, darkly funny, and ultimately human collapses in the history of American celebrity. A man who bought castles, who purchased a dinosaur skull and then had to give it back, who owned an island in the Bahamas and a pyramid-shaped tomb in New Orleans and a collection of comic books worth millions, and who somehow, with all of that, ended up owing the IRS $14 million and taking every paycheck he could find just to stay afloat. But here is the question that nobody stops long enough to ask. Was this really a downfall? Or was it something more complicated? A man so allergic to safety, so constitutionally incapable of living a small life, that even his destruction was outsized and operatic and, in its own strange way, entirely consistent with everything he had ever told you he was? And beneath all of it, beneath the tabloid headlines and the meme images and the talk show jokes, what was actually breaking? What was the wound he was trying to fill with all of that spending? What does it cost a man to be this much for this long? And who was he before the world decided who he was? Nicolas Kim Coppola was born on January 7th, 1964, in Long Beach, California, but the name he came into the world with was never the name that would make him famous. And that gap, that deliberate distance between birth and reinvention, tells you almost everything you need to know about where he started and where he was trying to go. His father was August Coppola, a professor of comparative literature and a man of genuine intellectual seriousness, the kind of father who quotes Baudelaire at dinner and means it. His mother, Joy Vogelsang, was a dancer and choreographer who struggled with mental illness throughout his childhood, a fact that Nicholas has spoken about carefully over the years with the particular tenderness of someone who loved a person who was also, at times, unreachable. His uncle, and this is the gravitational fact that defines everything about his early years, was Francis Ford Coppola, director of The Godfather, one of the most celebrated filmmakers in American history. Growing up in the shadow of that name is not like growing up in the shadow of an ordinary successful relative. It is like being a small plant placed next to a cathedral. The light still reaches you, but you are always aware of the architecture above. Nicholas felt this acutely. He has talked about it. The way the Coppola name both opened doors and made every door feel borrowed. The way the family's artistic reputation created a standard so high that merely meeting it would never be enough. He needed to exceed it. Or better, he needed to escape it entirely and build something that was undeniably, exclusively his. His parents divorced when he was 12. His mother's mental health struggles meant that the household was, at times, unstable in ways that a 12-year-old processes in his body before he can process them in his mind. The hypervigilance, the watching of emotional weather, the learned skill of reading a room for danger that later becomes, in an actor, an extraordinary sensitivity to subtext and feeling. You don't learn to read people like that in acting school. You learn it when you need it. He moved through adolescence with an intensity that made teachers uncomfortable and peers uncertain. He was, by his own account, obsessive, not in the casual way people claim obsession as a personality quirk, but genuinely, structurally obsessive, the kind of mind that latches onto something and cannot let go until it has extracted every possible meaning from it. He became obsessed with acting, not with fame, not with the industry, but with the actual work of becoming someone else, of using your body and your voice and your willingness to be seen as instruments of pure expression. He was 15 when he began studying at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. He was not, by the standards of the institution, a natural fit, too raw, too strange, too committed to ideas that the formal training found difficult to categorize. But something in him was already formed that no training could have manufactured. A willingness to go further than anyone around him was prepared to go. An appetite for risk that looked, from the outside, almost like recklessness, but was actually the product of a very specific calculation. If you are already the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola, the only way to matter is to be too big to be explained by the nepotism. He carried that wound. The son who left the name behind. The nephew who needed to prove he refused it. And the refusing shaped everything that came after. By the early 1980s, he was taking any role he could find. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. In 1982, so small a part it barely registered. Rumble Fish in 1983, directed by Francis Ford Coppola himself. A collaboration that complicated all the tidy narratives about distance and independence. Racing with the Moon in 1984. He was accumulating work, accumulating technique, but what he was really accumulating was a philosophy, a way of approaching performance that was becoming more and more distinct from anything Hollywood had seen. He called it nouveau shamanic. He meant something specific by that, something stranger and more genuine than the phrase sounds in summary. He pulled teeth for a role without using anesthesia, because he needed to understand what a character in physical pain actually felt like in the body, not simulated pain, actual pain. He swallowed a live cockroach on camera because the character would have, and the character needed to be real. He had 2 tattoos put on his body that he later had to have surgically removed because the roles that required them were finished, but the marks remained. He was not performing commitment. He was enacting it in his own flesh. The lowest point came before the breakthrough, as lowest points tend to. The mid-1980s were grinding years. He was 20, 21, 22, taking roles in films that nobody remembers, sleeping on friends' couches in Los Angeles, eating poorly, carrying all of that family weight and all of that artistic ambition in a city that processes people like a machine processes, or extracting what's useful and discarding the rest. The relationship with his mother was a source of constant, low-grade heartbreak. Joy Vogelsang's mental illness had deepened over the years, and Nicholas found himself in the position that so many children of mentally ill parents find themselves in. Not old enough, not equipped enough, not resourced enough to do what the situation demanded, and yet responsible in ways that nobody had officially assigned but everyone understood. He has said, quietly, in various interviews over the decades, that his mother's struggles shaped his empathy, shaped his need, perhaps, to express the most extreme emotional states available to him, because he had grown up watching real extremity and had never been allowed to look away. He loved her. He was helpless. He kept working. 1987. He was 23. The film was Raising Arizona, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, and it was unlike anything that had existed before in American cinema. A screwball tragedy set in the Sonoran Desert, full of poetry and slapstick and genuine heartbreak, and at its center was Nicolas Cage, playing H.I. McDonough, an ex-convict with a good heart and a talent for catastrophe, and he was magnificent. Not in the polished, carefully calibrated way of the acting school graduate. Magnificent in the way that something is magnificent when it is absolutely itself, when no compromise has been made, when the performance is the person, strange and specific and alive. But before Raising Arizona landed, there was a moment, and if you know anyone who knew him in that period, they remember it, where it could have gone the other way, where the industry's patience was genuinely running out, where the directors who found him too intense and the studios who found him too risky and the agents who found him too much might have collectively produced the verdict that certain careers receive and never recover from. There is always that moment, the one where it could end before it begins. He was standing right at that edge. He didn't fall. Raising Arizona changed the conversation. And then Moonstruck in 1987, where he played Ronnie Camerari opposite Cher. Brooding, romantic, ridiculous, beautiful, and audiences felt something they hadn't quite felt before, a kind of tenderness for excess, an affection for a man so fully committed to his own feeling that he becomes, without trying, comic and tragic at the same time. The film won the Oscar. Nicolas Cage was not nominated, but he was noticed in a different way now, not as the Coppola nephew, not as the strange, intense kid, but as something genuinely new in the landscape of American acting. The rise was steep and fast and dazzling. 1994 brought It Could Happen to You, gentle and sweet. Leaving Las Vegas in 1995 arrived like a demolition charge. Nicolas Cage playing an alcoholic screenwriter drinking himself to death in Las Vegas, playing it not as a performance, but as a requiem, stripped of vanity, stripped of any concern for likability or comfort. He lost weight. He drank. Carefully, but he drank, to understand what his body felt like with alcohol running through it at that level. He gave an interview around that time where he said he wanted to reach a place in performance where he wasn't acting anymore, where the camera was catching something real. Leaving Las Vegas was that place. It was harrowing. It was unmistakable. It was the greatest performance of his life. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor on March 25, 1996, at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. He stood at that podium holding the Oscar, that particular gold statuette that represents the industry's highest official verdict. And he was 32 years old, and the son of August Coppola, and the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola, and the man who had changed his name to prove something. And he had proven it. Whatever the thing was that he needed to prove, he had proven it. The Oscar in his hand was the proof. And then the choices he made next are the ones that still make people shake their heads. He pivoted hard to action films. The Rock in 1996, Con Air in 1997, Face/Off in 1997. Films that were enormous at the box office and were received by the critical establishment that had just coronated him with a kind of confused disappointment. What was he doing? Why was he taking these roles? The man who had just won an Oscar for art house existential devastation was now trading one-liners on a prison plane with John Malkovich. But the answer, if you listen carefully, was always there. He didn't want to be a prestigious actor. He wanted to be a movie star. He wanted to be in things that people actually went to see, that filled theaters on opening weekend, that crossed class lines and demographic lines, and the lines that separate the kind of person who reads reviews from the kind of person who doesn't. He wanted to be popular in the full, democratic sense of the word. He had already proven he could make art. Now he wanted to make the other thing. Both of them, at the same time, as loudly as possible. It worked, for a while, brilliantly. National Treasure in 2004. Ghost Rider in 2007. The memes hadn't started yet, or they had only just started, and the idea of Nicolas Cage as cultural joke had not fully formed. And he was simply a very large, very successful movie star who did things differently than other very large successful movie stars, and that was, broadly, considered fine. The fall, when it came, was operatic in its scale and almost arithmetical in its logic. He earned enormous amounts of money. He spent more than that. The specifics are staggering and deserve to be stated plainly. He owned 15 houses. He purchased a Bavarian castle and a chateau in Bath, England. He bought 2 albino king cobras, not 1, 2. He purchased a yacht. He acquired a private jet. He bought a haunted house in New Orleans, a 9-foot Tarbosaurus Batard dinosaur skull for $276,000, which turned out to have been illegally smuggled and had to be returned to Mongolia. He amassed a comic book collection worth millions that included a copy of Action Comics #1, the first Superman appearance, which he eventually sold for $2.16 million. He also trusted the wrong people. He is not, by his own admission, someone who closely monitors spreadsheets. He hired business managers who were not as careful as they should have been, and possibly some who were not as honest as they should have been. And by the time the full picture assembled itself, The IRS was coming for $14 million in back taxes and properties were being foreclosed, and there was a very specific kind of public humiliation that comes not from failure, but from revealed overextension. The humiliation of a man whose ambitions, even his domestic ambitions, were simply bigger than his accounting. He filed a lawsuit against his former business manager, Samuel Levin. The lawsuit alleged negligent advice, mismanagement, poor investment guidance. Some of it was settled. None of it gave back the money or the properties or the privacy. And here is what is easy to miss in the debris of all that. He kept working, not with any apparent embarrassment, not with the furtive, quality-blind desperation that the narrative of collapse usually requires. He took bad movies, yes, a lot of them, many of them barely released direct to streaming things that his Oscar-winning peers would have refused categorically. He took them and he did something interesting with them. He was always, in every single one, fully present. Sometimes the movie didn't deserve what he brought, but he brought it anyway. There is a quality in that which deserves more consideration than it receives. The man never phoned it in. Never. Even in the films that nobody saw and nobody reviewed, and that disappeared from the culture almost as quickly as they appeared, he was there, committed, alive, strange, specific. Nicolas Cage in full, regardless of the material's quality, because the material's quality was the material's problem, not his. He had a philosophy about this, stated in various interviews with a consistency that suggests it is genuine and not a coping mechanism dressed as principle. Every film is an opportunity. Every performance is a chance to do something that has not been done before. You don't reserve that for the good ones. The reinvention, when it arrived, came from an unexpected direction. 2021, Pig. A quiet, devastating film about a man living alone in the Oregon wilderness who emerges to find his truffle-hunting pig, who has been stolen. That is the entire premise. It sounds like nothing. On screen it was everything. Nicolas Cage gave a performance of such controlled, interior, almost unbearable precision that critics who had spent a decade using him as shorthand for excess were suddenly reaching for different vocabulary. It was the performance of a man who had been through something and come out the other side not undamaged but clarified. The film was not a hit by commercial standards. It was a revelation by every other standard. And then the unbearable weight of massive talent in 2022. A film where he played a version of himself, a fictionalized Nicolas Cage adrift in irrelevance and debt, and played it with a self-awareness and humor and genuine pathos that only a person with real self-knowledge could have managed. The film was a love letter to his own absurdity, and it worked because the love was real and the absurdity was real and the tenderness underneath both of them was real. His personal life across all of this was its own saga. He married Patricia Arquette in 1995, and the marriage lasted until 2001. He married Lisa Marie Presley in 2002, a union that lasted 108 days and produced enough tabloid coverage to fill a shelf. He married Alice Kim in 2004, and they had a son, Kal-El, named after Superman's birth name. Because of course they did, because he is the man who named himself after comic book heroes and named his son after the most famous one. And that marriage lasted 12 years before ending in separation. He had another son, Weston, from an earlier relationship with actress Christina Fulton, and Weston has pursued his own acting career with his father's support and his father's intensity and some of his father's particular relationship to convention. He married Erica Koike in 2019 and sought an annulment 4 days later. He married Riko Shibata in 2021, and they had a daughter, August, in 2022. And in her name you can hear him circling back, giving his child the name of the father he complicated and loved and moved away from and missed. August, the full circle that only the end of a long road makes visible. He has spoken about his faith, not loudly, not as a platform, but in the way that people who have genuinely needed something speak about it. He was raised Catholic. He has explored other traditions. He has said in interviews that he believes in the soul, in something beyond the material, in the possibility that existence has a dimension that ordinary life doesn't capture. For a man who has pursued the extremes of material experience, the houses, the skulls, the cobras, the castles, this is not a contradiction. It may actually be the explanation. He was always looking for the thing beyond the thing, the experience behind the experience, the something that the objects were gesturing toward but never quite were. The Oscar sits somewhere. He has said he doesn't display it prominently, which is either an affectation or the most honest thing an Oscar winner has ever said. The gold statuette that represented the proof he needed is not the centerpiece of his life. It never really was. The proof, it turns out, is not the point. The working is the point. The becoming is the point. The strange, excessive, ungovernable life of a man who was never going to do this the reasonable way is the point. He is in his 60s now, still working, still strange, still showing up fully to whatever material the current moment has provided, still occasionally purchasing things that make financial advisors weep, still giving performances that range from transcendent to baffling, sometimes within the same scene. Still being Nicolas Cage in the fullest possible sense of a name he chose for himself when he was 20 years old and needed the world to see him without the weight of what he'd been born to carry. The Oscar is somewhere, real but uncentered, proof that arrived and then became just another object. Now I want to talk to you. You have probably laughed at him. Most of us have. The memes are genuinely funny, and he has been, at various points, genuinely absurd, and the laughter is not wrong. But I want to ask you to hold the laughter next to something else for a moment. Hold it next to a boy in Long Beach whose mother was unreachable and whose uncle was a genius and who decided, at 20 years old, that he would rather be too much than not enough. Hold it next to the man who pulled his own teeth because he needed to know what pain felt like from the inside. Hold it next to the person who kept showing up in every bad movie and every good one, with every single thing he had. You know what it feels like to want something so badly that you make terrible decisions in the vicinity of it. You know what it feels like to build an identity so large that you sometimes get lost inside it. You know what it feels like to spend money or time or love on things that can't actually fill the thing you're trying to fill, and to know that while you're doing it, and to do it anyway. He was never managing his image. He was living his life. The disaster was real. The cobras were real. The dinosaur skull was real. The IRS bill was real. And the grief underneath all of it. The boy who needed to prove something so badly that he changed his name and pulled his own teeth and bought a castle. That was the realest thing of all. The Oscar is somewhere in his house, not on display. A gold statue that represents proof he didn't need as much as he thought he did. And he is still going, still working, still becoming whatever the next version of this is. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Not about him, about you. What are you doing in the vicinity of the thing you're trying to fill? What are you buying or refusing or naming or renaming that is really about something that happened long before the purchase? What does the castle, your castle, whatever shape it takes, actually cost you? And is the person you've become in the pursuit of the proof worth more or less than the person you were before you decided you needed to prove it? The Oscar is real, and it's not enough. It never is. What's yours?